Brian Sabean has been with the San Francisco Giants for nearly 3 decades. He was the architect behind the 3 World Series teams. He moved into an advisory role once Farhan Zaidi and the new front office came in. And as of yesterday, he has joined the New York Yankees. So we're going to talk about Brian Sabean's legacy, also the Tommy La Stella DFA, and much more next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide episodes 3 days a week for now, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on today's show, yes, I want to talk about Brian Sabean's legacy in San Francisco. It is low-key kind of a big deal that he is leaving the organization and moving on to the New York Yankees. He says that he was not used as much as he thought he would be in his advisory role here over the last several years. We'll also get into the Tommy La Stella DFA, which we haven't had a chance to cover yet, and then we'll get to some mailbag questions at the end. But Brian Sabean leaves the Giants. It's not a great look when you hear him basically say that he expected to be used more than he was in his advisory role here. He goes back to his roots where he started. He started as a scout with the Yankees, earned some promotions there, but then came over to the Giants and became their general manager and had a ton of success ultimately when all is said and done. First year wasn't good. Then they had a run of many above 500 seasons in a row, including, a World Series appearance in 2002 and division titles, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of success in the early tenure after that first year, and then some down years in the mid 2000s, kind of the Barry Bonds home run chase years. And then, of course, ushering in the championship era in 10, 12, and 2014. He was behind all of that. I mean, obviously, it's a whole collective effort in the front office, but he was the head guy. And then, there was a restructuring at some point after the World Series runs, and Bobby Evans became the general manager, and Sabean was more is that when they promoted him to president of baseball operations? I don't think that was the title. It was more like he got back to his scouting roots at that point. And then the franchise kind of went downhill pretty quickly after that. But it's undoubtedly just a Hall of Fame type resume for Brian Sabean in what he did here in San Francisco. So I just wanted to pay him the respect that he deserves for his nearly 30 years of service to the San Francisco Giants. And it doesn't sound great when he says that he expected to be used more. I understand, if you just thought that your organization was ready to move on and have different leadership, but don't lead him to believe that he's going to be used more than he is. And he basically said he let his contract expire and then took what was a better opportunity with the New York Yankees. And he said at his age, it's all about being wanted and, needed. And he's just grateful for the opportunity with the Yankees that he wasn't getting here with the Giants. And what his title is with the New York Yankees now is Executive Advisor to General Manager Brian Cashman. So good for him. I think he's from New York. I probably should have looked that up, but he's got roots there. That's where he started, came to the Giants nearly 30 years. So just, incredible legacy, the 3 World Series titles. He should be a Hall of Fame executive in my mind. There's no doubt about it. The Giants released a nice statement. They said the San Francisco Giants would like to extend its deepest gratitude to Brian Sabean for his enormous contributions to our organization and wish him the best of luck on his new position with the New York Yankees. Brian has been a pillar of our game and a cornerstone of this franchise for 30 years, and we are extremely appreciative of his leadership and the legacy he leaves behind. We truly believe he's a Hall of Fame worthy executive in every sense of the word and wish him his wife Amanda, and his entire family nothing but the best in the future. He will always be a forever Giant. So again, I understand if the whole organization was ready to kind of move on from an era, right? It was a long that Brian Sabean and Bobby Evans and all the it wasn't like Bobby Evans was a new guy who just completely changed everything. He was part of that leadership to begin with, and so it was more of like a restructuring of the front office versus some major changes when Bobby Evans was suddenly the general manager. But it is important to note that a lot of the decisions they made after that point weren't they didn't work out as well. Like the decision to trade for Andrew McCutchen and Evan Longoria, some of the signings they made, Mark Melancon, Denard Span, like a lot of stuff, Johnny Cueto, Jeff Samardzija, after the point where, it may have just been misfortune for Bobby Evans to be the face of the team at the time that they were making those calls, because I think it was a collective effort, whether it was technically Brian Sabean at the helm or if it was Bobby Evans. But nonetheless, it does look like when Bobby Evans took over, things kind of went south, not to throw Bobby Evans under the bus. So then, it really, all those moves I just mentioned didn't work out. And the organization decided it was time for a clean break. And they basically, that whole group with Evans and Sabian and all them were like taken out of power. And the new front office was brought in, led by Farhan Zaidi. And, Zaidi ultimately hired a general manager, Scott Harris, who leaves. And then Pete Patella is now the general manager. But that is a clean break and a different leadership. But the the Brian Sabean led front office was a pillar here for a long time, through certainly the highest of highs and also some significantly low lows. They did have a bad season in 2017, lost nearly 100 games, but technically he wasn't in charge at that point. So anyway, the point is, I just want to say thank you to Brian Sabean for his decades of service to the San Francisco Giants and for bringing us 3 World Series championships, which is more than almost any team can say over a 30-year period, let alone a 5-year period in which they won 3 World Series. So thank you, Brian Sabean. Best of luck to you. I'm glad you're going to a situation that is better and where you feel like you're needed and wanted. That's what you deserve. And best of luck with the New York Yankees. Obviously joining a good situation there. It's not a bad place to be. So, hey, he gets Aaron Judge. He was part of the team that pursued him, and then he goes to the team that ultimately got him. So congratulations and thank you. So coming up in just a minute, I want to turn our attention to something we didn't yet talk about, which is kind of not a big deal, but something worth talking about. And that is that the Giants finally DFA'd Tommy La Stella. So I'm going to go into what went into the thinking there, what it means, like what they owe him, and all about the Tommy La Stella DFA. We'll get to it in just a second. But before we do, this episode is brought to you by Bet Online. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball. We've got it all at BetOnline. And of course, baseball as well during the season, but also in the off season. This off season, we've been talking a lot about, they had odds on where free agents are going to land. A lot of that is over, although Carlos Correa, if you have a bet sitting out there, it's still pending. That deal is not yet official. How about we had over-unders on the contract for Aaron Judge? We said take the under on 375, and in fact, that did end up being correct. At 360, he ultimately got. Coming up soon, we'll have over-unders on win totals, and we'll talk to you about it all off-season and then during the season as well. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline is where the game starts. All right, as promised, I want to get into this Tommy La Stella DFA, and then we're going to get to some mailbag questions towards the end. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Locked On MLB Prospects host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. His show, Locked On MLB Prospects, is free and available wherever you get podcasts. So yes, Tommy La Stella was DFA'd, and to a lot of people, this was a long time coming. But to me, I'm just going to continue to point out that this deal was, is, and always will have been small potatoes. Like, we act like this was some kind of major deal that was holding them back or something. It's really the most, like, I don't want to undermine the person Tommy La Stella. He tried his best. He had injuries. He had surgery on both Achilles. It just didn't work out. He would be the first to admit, I'm not trying to bury the guy personally, but his performance on the field was pretty rough in 2 years in San Francisco. He didn't play a lot. I mean, he played 76 games in year one and 60 games in year two, a total of just 136 games and 437 plate appearances in 2 seasons of work. Had an 86 weighted runs created plus, meaning about 14% below average offense by this metric. On base percentage was just 297. He was supposed to be a guy, doesn't hit for a ton of power, but really gets on base and really hits right-handed pitching. And it just never came to fruition. But the biggest deal to me is that it frees up a roster spot. It's not about the money. This is a small deal. It was a 3-year, $18.75 million deal. Just keep in mind, they're paying Jock Peterson $19.65 million next year alone. And he's a platoon player, just like Tommy La Stella. So, La Stella's deal is for less total money over 3 years than Peterson's deal is for next year alone. Now, some might be saying, well, Peterson's deal is a huge overpay or whatever. Maybe a little bit, but again, it's a 1-year deal, so there's not a ton of risk there. But I don't know. The other fact is that La Stella's deal was backloaded, and so they owe him, $11.5 million this year out of that 18.75. So in year one, he got like $2 million. In year two, what was it, like $6-something million. And now in year three, $11.5 million. And so if they have like a firm restriction on spending, which they claim they don't, currently their payroll projects at about $190 million, which is about $30 million more than it was last year. And the offseason is not over. So I'll be very interested to see where that number ends up when all is said and done. But, $11.5 million spending on a player you've just cut obviously is not great. But at the same time, it's just not as big of a deal as some seem to think. The bigger deal is that they freed up that roster spot. They're not just going to keep trying to make Tommy La Stella work when it's not working. They just kept trying to make it work because obviously there was a reason they targeted him in the first place. Like I said, they thought he was going to really hit right-handed pitching in kind of a unique way in that he was supposedly a guy who made a lot of contact, didn't strike out, also was super patient and didn't chase out of the zone and had surprising power. If you look at some of his kind of numbers before he joined the Giants, I wanted them to sign Tommy La Stella, and I was happy when they got him. But obviously the performance that we've seen over the 2 years he was here wasn't what I was talking about, right? He underperformed versus what he had been like in his whole career, really, and also specifically the last few years when he seemed to figure some things out and add some power. But like I said, he had injuries. He had a couple, and this was weird. They said that he had one Achilles operated on, but he actually had both Achilles operated on, I think, in the 2021 offseason. So anyway, he was compromised. They did this because they needed to clear a 40-man spot. So, basically, it's funny. I just wonder, what went into this being the moment that they decided to do it. I think it was for Taylor Rogers. When they had to add Taylor Rogers to the 40-man roster, they needed to clear someone. And what they do is they cut Tommy La Stella. So Michael Conforto, his signing has yet to be announced. Andy Baggerly of The Athletic reported that Conforto has passed his physical, but the delay in announcing the deal is simply administrative stuff, which to me means it could very well mean efforts are being made to clear another 40-man spot, like working out a trade of somebody on the 40-man roster, versus if you just announce the deal before you have a trade or something in place, you've got to make a corresponding move, like cutting somebody else. It's not like cutting somebody else. It is. In the offseason like this, you can't use the 60-day injured list like you can during the season. So anyway, that's probably the delay. By the way, Baggerly has reported, I think I just said this, but I'm going to say it again in case I didn't, that he passed his physical. And so, Conforto coming off the shoulder injury that caused him to miss all of last season, the physical was after the Correa debacle, the nightmare, as it says over my shoulder here, we can't just assume these guys are going to pass their physicals, but he did, according to Baggerly, and I would expect that they've said that the deal will probably be announced in the coming days, and that was many days ago, so I would expect it any moment now. So anyway, that's that. I don't think it's as big of a deal as people seem to think. It stinks paying a guy $11.5 million when he's not even on your roster, although he's undoubtedly going to clear waivers if that hasn't already happened. I think there's a week for that to happen. I think maybe it's less than that. And once he clears waivers, any team can pick him up for the league minimum salary. Although the Giants, the value was in the 40-man spot, so I would doubt that the Giants would sign him to a major league contract. So, he might end up somewhere else, Colorado Rockies or something, for the league minimum salary, and then the Giants have to pay him regardless. And whatever this new team pays him gets subtracted out of what the Giants owe him. So it's just not that big of a deal, but it did happen. It was worth mentioning. And to me, the positive, if you're happy about Tommy La Stella being gone, is that opportunity will go to someone else. And they're not just going to try to force this to happen. So anyway, turning the page, I want to get to some mailbag questions. These were some questions I meant to get to yesterday, but I actually skipped over them and answered ones that weren't the ones I meant to get to quite yet. But we've got questions about, are the Giants going to sign another position via free agency for an everyday player? Because I believe at this moment in time, they're still at least a player short on the position player side. When you look at across the diamond and look at their projected roster, what are they doing at first base exactly? What are they doing at third base exactly? Outfield is easier to put together, but we'll get to that question and several others in just a minute. But before we do, all right, as promised, getting to some mailbag questions. The first one here coming from Chubbs11, who says, will the Giants attempt to fill out one more position, such as first base, with an everyday player via trade or free agency? I guess I misspoke a little bit when I was describing the question a minute ago. You say or via trade or free agency. That makes the answer even more likely to be yes, in my opinion. It's not a sure thing. They could very well roll with mostly this position player group in terms of the projected starters. I still definitely is a strong word, but I would expect them to add at least one infielder who can be a true backup shortstop, someone who can give you good defense at multiple infield positions. And a couple guys we've zeroed in on it for this are Ha-Sung Kim of the San Diego Padres. Love Ha-Sung Kim, would be a great add. And also Joey Wendell of the Miami Marlins. Don't love Joey Wendell as much. Defensively, good. But Ha-Sung Kim can be kind of leveraged. He's good against left-handed pitching and good defensively everywhere. So he wouldn't have to be platooned anywhere because the glove is that much of an impact. But you could start him every time there's a lefty on the mound and get great defense and a bat. Whereas Wendell, I think there's a little bit more uncertainty with the bat. But I would expect them to do that because right now their infield defense hasn't changed. And so they said they need to improve the defense, and in the infield they haven't. But projected across, you've got at first base, we're imagining that it's LaMonte Wade Jr. who's likely to start against righties there. And then you've got multiple kind of right-handed platoon type bats who could also play that position, like Wilmer Flores, J.D. Davis, and David Villar. At third base, it's kind of that same cast of characters minus LaMonte Wade Jr., where you've got David Villar, Wilmer Flores, and J.D. Davis. None of whom would I love defensively at third base. You would have nobody capable of playing good defense at third base. Evan Longoria, by the way, signed a deal with the Arizona Diamondbacks, so he's off the board. Not that I thought he would be a great player to bring back. So thank you for your service, Evan Longoria, but he's on the Arizona Diamondbacks now. And so anyway, first base you mentioned, I think they want to see David Villar, right? And they did play Villar some at second base last year. He certainly played some third. He also played first. He also DH'd. And so it's unclear to me exactly where they want to see Villar play, but I think they want to give him a real opportunity. And then Casey Schmidt reached AAA at the end of last year, and he's one of their better position player prospects. And so I would anticipate that we very well could see Casey Schmidt at some point in 2023, and he would bring you that plus defense at third base. So that's a good thing that he's coming down the road here and getting close to the major leagues. But to start the season, I don't know exactly what the plan is. I would imagine as of right now, it's J.D. Davis or David Villar at third base pretty much every day. I don't think they want to see too much of Wilmer Flores defensively at third. So they could afford to add, like you said, an everyday player at either third or first. I wouldn't think both. Brandon Belt is still out there and is a possibility at first, but that would seemingly open up a trade possibility with a guy like Lamont Wade Jr., because at this point you're getting kind of a roster crunch on the major league roster in trying to fit everybody on. They did trade for Blake Sable, the catcher who was a Rule 5 pick this year, and so he has to be on the roster. So right now we're projecting him on the roster, and Austin Wynns doesn't have any minor league options, so you can't just send him down to start the year. Joey Bart is the one with options, so does that mean Joey Bart doesn't start the year in the majors? So right now the roster has some real questions as to what are they going to do, and some pieces don't necessarily seem to fit, and there's some redundancy with the three righties who are kind of corner players, Wilmer Flores and Villar and Davis. So yeah, it remains to be seen, but that's why, it is only January 4th and there's time to figure it out. I want to get to this other question next, from Henry, who says, surprised no one ever mentions J.D. Davis. He hit 8 homers in 150 plus at-bats as a Giant in 2022. Career .350 on base percentage. He should be starting first base, third base to start the season, but everyone has other players ahead of him in the depth charts. So it's a good point. You're right. Everybody kind of skips over J.D. Davis when we're projecting, just like I did right now. But I did mention him, but I didn't say he should be starting. You're right. He has a .350 career on base percentage. That is nothing to scoff at whatsoever. That is very good. The problem with J.D. Davis is that he's never been able to provide defensive value anywhere or base running value. And so he's pretty much a one-trick pony. It's a good trick to have in that he can hit. And he hit with the Giants. I mean, you're right. He had a 142 weighted runs created plus with the Giants, 42% above average offense, 361 on base, 496 slugging, 234 isolated power. He did strike out 35.5% of the time, which is really high, but I mean, it's not as high as problematic Joey Bart levels, but it's high. But yeah, I mean, it's the defense. The question is, can he be an everyday player with that kind of defense? If he can somehow figure out a way to improve, then this is a quality player. But ultimately, I think you're looking at more of a Darren Ruff type of character where you're intrigued by the bat. Obviously, the bat fell apart for Darren Ruff last year, but in years prior, it was like, yes, the bat is special perhaps and impact, but does he have a defensive home? Is there anywhere on the field where he's not going to actively hurt you defensively? And that's kind of the situation with J.D. Davis. If you just look at his career, like defensive runs saved, ultimate zone rating, outs above average, it's just negative at every position he plays, like every year pretty much. So for that reason, I'm not even sure that I think it's a possibility that they trade him because they have a similar young player in David Villar, who I think they want to see. And it's hard to fit Villar and Davis and Flores. Like, where do they all fit? I don't know exactly. So you could have you'd have J.D. Davis at first, Villar at third, and Flores on the bench. They could absolutely do that. But I think they also want to mix in Wade, who's out of options himself, so he can't be sent down. So they've got to do something. So I think that there's more moves to come and that you may end up seeing a trade for involving one of these guys down the road here as we get closer to the start of the season. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On MLB Prospects. Host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. Helps me out a lot, so thank you in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. Can't wait to be with you again one more time this week. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.